Husband dumped me via text. I'm done with this marriage, moving to NYC with my 25-year-old GF. I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unremarkable in every way. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows of our suburban home, the home John and I had purchased 5 years ago with dreams of filling it with children and memories. I remember the exact shirt I was folding, John's blue Oxford button-down, the one he wore to our anniversary dinner just 3 weeks prior, the one where he had looked into my eyes and promised forever. My phone buzzed again, impatient on the mahogany dresser we'd found at an estate sale during our first year of marriage. I didn't expect much. Maybe a message from a friend or a random notification. But when I glanced at the screen, my world stopped. I'm done with this marriage. Moving to NYC with my 25-year-old girlfriend. Don't contact me. 17 words. That's all it took to end 8 years of marriage. 17 words delivered through a text message, as if you were canceling dinner plans or rescheduling a dentist appointment. Not ending a life we had built together. I stared at the words, my heartbeat slowing to an eerie calm. The shirt slipped from my fingers as I sat down on our king-sized bed, the bed where just this morning he had kissed me goodbye before leaving for what he called an important business meeting. He thought he had just destroyed me. He thought I'd collapse, beg, and cry. He had no idea, because I already knew. I had known about Lisa for months. 3 months and 17 days, to be exact. I knew her name, her age, her preference for expensive wine she couldn't afford on her receptionist's salary. I knew she worked at the law firm across from John's office. I knew she wore size 6 shoes and had a tattoo of a butterfly on her left shoulder blade. I had pictures of them entering hotel rooms, screenshots of their text messages, recordings of their phone calls. I had known about the lies, the late nights at the office, the secret bank transfers to fund their weekends away while I worked overtime at my job to help us save for our future. I knew about the reservations for 2 in fancy restaurants while I sat home, trusting him when he said he was networking with clients. The laundry basket sat forgotten as I moved to the window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass, each drop merging with another, growing stronger before falling away. I pressed my forehead against the cool pane, remembering the moment I had first discovered the truth. It had been an accident. I wasn't the type of wife who snooped through her husband's things. His phone had chimed while he was in the shower, and I had glanced at it absently, thinking it might be important. The message preview showed just enough. Miss you already. Last night was amazing. Can't wait until... That night, after he'd fallen asleep, I'd gone through everything. His emails, his messages, his bank statements, credit card bills, everything. And piece by piece, I had uncovered the extent of his betrayal. But I hadn't confronted him. Not then. Always be the smartest person in the room, my grandmother used to tell me. And never let them know what you're thinking. So I had smiled. I had kissed him goodbye each morning. I had listened to his lies about working late and business trips. And all the while I had been planning. And while John thought he was playing me, I had been 10 steps ahead, and he was about to regret everything. I moved away from the window and picked up my phone again, reading his message one more time. A strange, cold laugh escaped my lips. The timing was almost perfect. Just 2 days ago, I had finalized the last pieces of my plan. I walked to our closet, half of which was now conspicuously empty, his expensive suits and shoes gone. He must have come by while I was at work yesterday. I pushed aside my clothes and reached to the back, pulling out a sealed manila envelope. Inside was everything I had gathered over the past months. Evidence, bank statements, photographs, all the ammunition I would need. Next to it was a smaller envelope containing a burner phone, the one I had used to make contact with someone who would become an unexpected ally in this war John had unknowingly started. I returned to the bed, sitting down with both envelopes. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the sting of betrayal, the sharp edge of humiliation. 8 years of marriage ended in a text message. All those promises, those shared dreams, the life we had built, gone just like that. But the pain quickly hardened into something else. Something colder, more powerful, I picked up my regular phone and composed a reply to John's message. Something he would expect from me. Desperate, confused, pleading. The Emily he thought he knew. The Emily he thought he had broken. John, please, we need to talk about this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Please call me. I sent it, knowing he wouldn't respond. Knowing he was probably laughing with Lisa about how pathetic I was, how easily he had escaped our marriage. Then I picked up the burner phone and sent a different message. It's time. He's made his move. The response came almost immediately. I'm ready. I stood up, suddenly energized. I moved to the dresser where a framed photo of John and me on our wedding day still stood. I picked it up, studied his smiling face. He looked so sincere, so in love. Was he lying even then? I placed the photo face down and walked to the kitchen. From a drawer, I retrieved a bottle of our most expensive champagne, a Cru Grande Cuvée we had been saving for our 10th anniversary. I popped the cork and poured myself a glass. Standing in our kitchen, my kitchen now, I raised the glass in a silent toast to the man who thought he had destroyed me but had only unleashed something he had never seen before, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. John thought this was the end of our story, but he was wrong. This was just the beginning. I wasn't stupid. I knew Lisa wasn't with John for love. She was there for the money. And money? I had plenty. What John never understood about our marriage was that I was the financial genius. While he flaunted his executive title and corner office, I quietly built an investment portfolio that had tripled in value over the past 5 years. John saw my job at the financial consulting firm as a cute hobby, never bothering to ask how much I was worth. He assumed the designer handbags he occasionally gifted me were the height of my ambition. His greatest mistake was underestimating me. His second greatest was assuming Lisa's loyalty. One call was all it took. I waited until 9 p.m., when I knew John would be celebrating his newfound freedom at some overpriced Manhattan restaurant, charging everything to the platinum card he thought I couldn't access. I sat at my kitchen table, burner phone in hand, finger hovering over Lisa's number, a number I'd had for weeks, just waiting for the right moment. Hello. Lisa's voice was cautious at first, uncertain. She clearly didn't recognize the number. Hello, Lisa. This is Emily, John's wife. Well, soon-to-be ex-wife, I suppose. The silence that followed lasted 5 heartbeats. I imagined her face draining of color, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around her phone. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered unconvincingly. Please, I said, my voice eerily calm. Let's not waste each other's time. John texted me today. He's quite proud of himself, moving to New York with his younger girlfriend. That's you, by the way, in case you thought you were special enough to be the only one. Another pause. I could almost hear her mind racing, calculating her options. What do you want? She finally asked, her voice hardening. If you're calling to beg for your husband back, you should know that won't happen. I laughed then, a genuine laugh that seemed to catch her off guard. Oh, Lisa, I don't want John back. He's all yours. I'm calling to make you an offer. An offer? The curiosity in her voice was unmistakable. Tell me something first. What has John promised you? A penthouse? Designer clothes? The lifestyle of a wealthy man's girlfriend. I heard her inhale sharply. I'd hit a nerve. That's none of your business, she replied, but there was hesitation in her voice. Did you know John's company is failing? Did he tell you about the 3 clients he lost last month? Or the fact that he's been dipping into our retirement savings to maintain his image? More silence. I'd planted the seed of doubt. What if I told you I could offer you more than John ever could? What if I told you that working with me would set you up for life, not just until John finds his next 25-year-old? When she spoke again, her voice had changed. She was listening now, really listening. I'm not sure what you're suggesting. It's simple, I explained. John thinks he's walking away with everything. He has no idea that I've been tracking his affair for months, gathering evidence, protecting my assets. Right now, he believes you're his escape plan, his fresh start. I paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. Convince him to move all his money into the safe account, I instructed. Play the long game. Make him think you love him. What safe account? She asked, curiosity fully engaged now. The one you're going to suggest he create. One that his vindictive wife can't touch during the divorce. You'll tell him your uncle is a financial advisor who specializes in protecting assets during messy divorces. The account will seem legitimate. It will have all the proper paperwork. But it will be mine. And what's in it for me? She asked, her voice now businesslike. The facade of the love-struck mistress had evaporated completely. $2 million, I said simply. Half up front, half when it's done. The sharp intake of breath told me I had her. $2 million was far more than she'd ever get from John, even if she managed to marry him before he traded her in for a newer model. How do I know you can deliver? She asked, caution still evident in her tone. I'll transfer $50,000 to an account of your choosing right now, as a show of good faith. The rest of the first $1 million comes when John creates the account. There was a pause, and I heard the soft tap of fingernails on a hard surface. She was thinking, weighing her options. You know, she said slowly, John talks in his sleep. Sometimes he says your name, and not in a nice way. I smiled at that. I'm sure he does. He calls you frigid, boring, says you never took risks. And yet here I am, taking the biggest risk of all. She agreed too easily. And that was the moment I knew. John had no idea he had just dug his own grave. We spent the next hour planning the details. Lisa was smarter than I had initially given her credit for. She understood banking, transfers, offshore accounts. She had clearly done her research, preparing for a future she had hoped John would provide. Now she was simply switching teams. One last thing, I said before we ended the call. I want a video. When it all falls apart for him, when he realizes what's happened, I want to see his face. That can be arranged, she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen, watching the steam rise from my tea. Outside, the rain had stopped, and moonlight filtered through the clouds. For the first time since reading John's text, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was justice. This was reclaiming what was rightfully mine. My dignity, my future, my power. Tomorrow, Lisa would begin her performance as the devoted girlfriend. And John, blinded by ego and lust, would fall for every word. The game had begun. John thought he was escaping me. He packed his things and left, grinning like he had won. 2 weeks after his devastating text, John returned to the house to collect the rest of his belongings. I made sure to be away, leaving a note with my lawyer's contact information taped to the door. Through the discreet security cameras I'd installed, I watched him strut through our home, cherry-picking what he wanted. The vintage watch collection his father had left him, his golf clubs, the first-edition books he'd never read but displayed prominently to impress guests. His face throughout was illuminated with the particular glow of a man who believes he's gotten away with something. Each item he tossed into boxes wasn't just a possession, it was a victory lap. When he paused in our bedroom, looking at the empty closet space where his designer suits had hung, his lips curled into a smile I'd never seen before.
Smug.
Victorious.
Free.
I let him go. I let him believe he was free, that he was about to start a perfect new life in NYC with Lisa. That night, as he drove away for the last time, I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted the security monitor. Enjoy it while it lasts, I whispered. The divorce papers arrived at his new Manhattan address 3 days later. My attorney had prepared a deceptively standard agreement, one that any reasonable person would perceive as fair, even generous. It granted John full control of his personal investments and business holdings, asking only that our shared property be divided equally. What John didn't know was that this was merely Act 1. Meanwhile, Lisa and I kept playing our parts. We communicated exclusively through burner phones and encrypted messages. Her updates were frequent and detailed. He's looking at penthouses in Tribeca, asking prices starting at $3.2 million. Started the conversation about financial security today. He's worried you'll try to take everything. Mention my financial advisor uncle last night. He's interested. Lisa was surprisingly good at this, a natural manipulator. Perhaps in another life, she could have been a spy. She knew exactly when to push and when to pull back, when to play the adoring girlfriend, and when to introduce subtle anxieties about financial security. She pushed him, urged him to sell our old house, liquidate assets, and move every last penny into that special account. My account. John, baby, I just worry about what she might do, Lisa had said, her voice a perfect blend of concern and adoration. I knew this because she recorded their conversations, another term of our arrangement. My uncle says this happens all the time. Vengeful ex-wives destroying everything their husbands worked for. John, predictably, had fallen for it. Your uncle really thinks this account would be safe? She couldn't touch it during the divorce? He's done this for dozens of clients, Lisa assured him, her voice honeyed with false devotion. The account would be in a holding company's name, technically not yours until after the divorce is final. She'd never even know it exists. Within a month, John had transferred over $2.1 million into the safe account, an offshore entity that, through a labyrinth of shell companies and legal maneuvers, led directly back to me. The irony was exquisite. Every dollar he thought he was hiding from me was actually flowing right into my control. He spent the money like he was royalty, designer suits, first-class flights, a penthouse overlooking the city. The real genius of our plan was that John wasn't actually spending his own money. He was spending from a line of credit I had arranged, secured against the funds he had hidden with me. Every extravagant purchase, every lavish expense, was essentially a loan from me, one with astronomical interest rates buried in fine print he never bothered to read. He just dropped $32,000 on a watch, Lisa texted one evening. Said he deserves it after being financially suffocated for years. I laughed at that. During our marriage, I had been the one insisting we save, invest wisely, prepare for the future. He had called me paranoid, controlling. Now, freed from my suffocating influence, he was spending like there was no tomorrow. And for him, there wouldn't be. I watched from a distance, following their social media posts. They were quite the pair, Manhattan's newest power couple. Lisa played her role perfectly, posting photos of them at exclusive restaurants, gallery openings, weekend trips to the Hamptons. Her captions were always the same, variations on living my best life and when you know, you know. John looked happier than I'd ever seen him. In each photo, he seemed to stand taller, smile wider. He had reinvented himself as some Manhattan mogul, dropping hints about a major business expansion in his LinkedIn updates. His former colleagues commented with congratulations while I imagined their private messages asking what exactly his new venture was. There was no venture, of course. Just the illusion of success, funded by loans he could never repay, secured against money that was never really his. 3 months into their New York adventure, Lisa initiated the final phase. Over dinner at Per Se, a $1,200 meal charged to his rapidly maxing out credit card, she casually mentioned wanting children. I can see us with a family, she told him, her eyes wide with practiced sincerity. A little boy with your eyes, living in a beautiful brownstone with a garden. The mention of children was the trigger. As planned, it sent John into a frenzy of securing their future. Within a week, he had liquidated his remaining legitimate assets, the small inheritance from his grandmother, his 401k, even selling his beloved vintage car collection, all transferred into the safe account for their future family. I received the confirmation late on a Friday night. The final transfer had cleared. Every penny John had, inherited, earned, or borrowed, now sat in accounts under my control. Lisa had completed her part of the bargain flawlessly. I waited. Everything was in place. I watched the sunrise that Saturday morning, a strange calm settling over me. Today was the day John's perfect life would implode. Today was the day he would learn that freedom has a price. And he was about to pay it in full. Then came the morning everything fell apart. It was a Tuesday, precisely 4 months after John's life-changing text message. I had chosen the date deliberately. A Tuesday, just like the day he had ended our marriage with 17 callous words. I could almost picture it. John waking up in silk sheets, stretching, expecting to see Lisa curled up beside him. The morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, illuminating the Manhattan skyline he had come to view as the backdrop to his new, perfect life. Instead, Lisa gone. No note. No dramatic goodbye. No explanation. Just an empty space where she had been, her closet cleared out during the night while he slept soundly, aided by the sleeping pills she had slipped into his evening scotch. The only trace of her, a lingering scent of Chanel No. 5 and a lipstick stain on a wine glass in the sink. I imagined him calling her name, his voice echoing through the empty penthouse. Checking the bathroom, the guest room, even looking out on the balcony. I imagined the first flutter of panic in his chest, the quickening pulse, the confusion. Then the real shock would come. His bank accounts, empty. He would have checked his phone, of course. That would be his first instinct, to call her, to check his accounts, to make sense of what was happening. But when he opened his banking app, the numbers would stare back at him like a death sentence. $0. $0. $0 across every account. The special account, the offshore safety net that was supposed to be untouchable, would simply show account not found when he tried to access it through the portal his financial advisor had provided. I paid good money to a team of elite hackers to ensure the digital trail led nowhere. Any attempt to trace the funds would hit walls of encrypted data and shell companies registered in countries that don't cooperate with U.S. financial investigations. His credit cards declined. Panic rising, he would have tried to use his credit cards. Perhaps he'd call room service, needing coffee to think clearly. Perhaps he'd try to book a flight to track down Lisa, or call a car to take him to the bank in person. But every card would be declined. Every single one. The night before, at precisely 3 a.m., all his credit accounts had been frozen due to suspicious activity. Not canceled, frozen. An important distinction that meant hours, possibly days, of bureaucratic hell trying to get them reactivated. Forms to fill out, identity to verify, phone calls with overseas customer service representatives who would transfer him endlessly between departments. And waiting for him on the kitchen counter, delivered by special courier who had been instructed to slip it under the door at 5 a.m. A legal notice on the kitchen counter. I now owned everything. The document would be 23 pages of precise legal language, but the summary page laid it out in clear terms even his panicked mind could grasp. Due to evidence of financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty during marriage, the court has granted an emergency asset freeze and preliminary judgment in favor of Emily Matthews. All assets formerly held by John Matthews have been legally transferred to Emily Matthews, including but not limited to bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, business interests, and personal property. This judgment includes the leasehold interest in the property at Penthouse Address, which is now the sole property of Emily Matthews. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises immediately. The signature of a judge, a real one, not forged, would be at the bottom, alongside my attorney's contact information. What John wouldn't know was that the judge was my former college roommate's father, a man who had watched me grow up and who viewed John's behavior with particular disgust. The emergency order was temporary, of course, a 10-day hold that would eventually require a full hearing. But 10 days was all I needed. By then, the offshore transfers would be complete, the evidence of his financial infidelity during our marriage would be presented to the court, and his reputation would be in tatters. I had coached Lisa on exactly what to include in her sworn affidavit. Details of how John had planned to hide assets during our divorce, how he had boasted about leaving me with nothing, how he had transferred company funds to personal accounts. Some of it was true, some wasn't. All of it was devastating. At exactly 9 a.m., as John was likely still reeling from shock, the building's security team would have received notification of the ownership change. 2 security guards, both large, both expressionless, would knock on the penthouse door. Security dragged him out of the penthouse while he screamed. There must be a mistake, he probably yelled. But there was no mistake. I watched it all unfold through the security camera feed I had access to, another expense that was well worth the cost. John, still in his pajama bottoms and a wrinkled t-shirt, his hair disheveled, his face contorted with rage and disbelief, being escorted through the lobby of the exclusive building he had bragged about to everyone who would listen. Residents he had tried to impress watched with thinly veiled curiosity. The doorman who had greeted him by name just yesterday now looked through him as if he were a stranger. The car service driver who had been called to remove him refused to take his declined credit cards, demanding cash John didn't have. In the end, he walked away from the building with nothing but his phone, wallet, and the clothes on his back. No suitcase, no laptop, no box of belongings, nothing. By noon, the locks had been changed. By 1 o'clock, his biometric access to the building had been deleted from the system. By 3, his calls to the building management went straight to voicemail. He was done, and I was just getting started. That night, I received a simple text from an unknown number, Lisa, from her new phone and her new life in Paris. It's done. Access to the cameras is in your email. Enjoy the show. I opened my laptop and clicked the link she had sent. Multiple camera angles of the penthouse appeared on my screen, cameras John had installed for security, but that Lisa had reprogrammed to send their feed directly to me. And so I watched as John, having borrowed money from someone to get a hotel room for the night, spent hours on the phone, calling his lawyer, the bank, the police, former friends, anyone who might help him understand what had happened. One by one, they all gave him the same message. There was nothing they could do. He was alone, abandoned, betrayed, just like he had left me. Days later, he called me from a payphone. The screen of my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number, a New York area code. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something told me to answer. Intuition, perhaps, or maybe just the desire to hear his voice now that everything had changed. Hello. I kept my tone neutral, professional. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then, a voice I barely recognized, hoarse, defeated, small. Emily. Just my name. Not a question, not a demand. A whisper of recognition from a man who sounded like he'd aged decades in a week. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us like a chasm too wide to cross. Emily, please, he started, but I could hear it in his voice. He knew. He knew I did this. The payphone's background noise filtered through, honking horns, distant sirens, the sound of a city that had once represented his triumph, but now surrounded him like a maze with no exit. I pictured him huddled in a grimy phone booth, clutching the receiver like a lifeline, his designer clothes wrinkled from being slept in, his perfect hair unwashed. You don't get to say my name. I cut him off. You're nothing to me now. He exhaled sharply, the sound crackling through the connection. I need to understand what happened. Everything is gone. The accounts, the penthouse, Lisa. Lisa was never yours, I said, surprised by the calm in my voice. Neither was anything else, apparently. Did you? He stopped, recalibrated. What do you want? What would it take to fix this? I laughed then, a sound so foreign to my own ears that it momentarily startled me. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that emerges from somewhere deep and primal, where pain has transformed into something harder, something unbreakable. Fix this? You think this is something that can be fixed? I asked. Like a leaky faucet or a flat tire? I'll sign whatever you want, he pleaded. Full divorce settlement, alimony, the house, anything. I just need enough to start over. Please. The desperation in his voice should have been satisfying. This is what I wanted, wasn't it? To hear him beg? To have him at my mercy? But instead of satisfaction, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Not because he deserved it, but because I suddenly saw how small he truly was. How pathetic. This man who had loomed so large in my life, who had the power to devastate me with a text message, was nothing but a collection of insecurities wrapped in expensive clothes and false confidence. There's nothing to sign, I said. The divorce was finalized yesterday. Your signature wasn't required, given the evidence of fraud. Evidence of... That's not possible. His voice rose an octave. You can't just... I can, and I did. Judge Harriman was quite sympathetic to my situation. Something about a man abandoning his wife of 8 years via text message while attempting to hide millions in assets. It struck a chord. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow. "My lawyer will." "Your lawyer dropped you as a client 3 days ago." Something about unpaid bills and reputational concerns. I heard him inhale sharply, processing this new information. Then came the question I'd been waiting for. Was Lisa part of this? Did you pay her to? To do what, John? To pretend to love you? To make you feel special and wanted? To stroke your ego while you destroyed someone who actually did love you? My voice remained steady, almost conversational. What does that say about you? That you can't tell the difference between real love and a performance? Silence again. When he spoke next, his voice had changed. The desperation was gone, replaced by a cold anger. "You've made a mistake, Emily. You think this is over, but it's not. I'll rebuild. I'll come back stronger. And when I do..." I hung up, and that night, I moved into his precious penthouse, sipping champagne on the balcony where he once stood, laughing at me. The key card worked smoothly in the slot, the door opening to reveal the home John had created for his new life, a life that now belonged to me. The penthouse was exactly as the security footage had shown, sleek, modern, cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the Manhattan skyline, twinkling like a carpet of stars against the night. I walked through each room slowly, taking inventory of John's taste. The furniture was all sharp angles and minimalist design, so different from the warm, classic pieces we had chosen together for our marital home. This place wasn't designed for comfort or family. It was designed to impress, to showcase wealth and status. In the master bedroom, I found remnants of Lisa's hasty departure, a forgotten earring on the nightstand, a lingering scent of perfume. I opened the closet to find it already half empty, John's expensive suits and shoes having been removed by the specialty moving company I'd hired. They would be delivered to my original home tomorrow, where they would be donated to a program helping formerly incarcerated men interview for jobs. John's beloved watch collection would fund scholarships for women escaping abusive relationships. I changed the sheets, unable to bear the thought of sleeping where they had been together. From my suitcase, I unpacked my own linens, high-quality cotton in a deep blue that reminded me of the ocean. I made the bed methodically, erasing any trace of the life that had briefly existed here. When everything was arranged to my satisfaction, I opened the bottle of Dom Perignon I had brought with me, the same vintage we had shared on our honeymoon. I poured a single glass and carried it out to the balcony. The night air was cool against my skin as I leaned against the railing, looking out at the city John had chosen over me. From this height, the people below looked like ants, the cars like toys. Was this what John had wanted? To feel above it all? Above me? I raised my glass in a solitary toast. To new beginnings, I whispered to the night. Now who's laughing? My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. Final papers filed. All transfers complete. Congratulations. I smiled, taking another sip of champagne. The bubbles danced on my tongue, crisp and perfect. In my mind, I could see John now, probably in some cheap motel room, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had all gone so wrong so quickly. What he didn't know was that this was just the beginning of his education. The lesson wasn't over. He had yet to understand the full extent of what happens when you underestimate a woman you've betrayed. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The work of rebuilding my life, not around the absence of John, but around the presence of my own power. I had taken back everything he had tried to steal from me. My financial security, my dignity, my future. And I had gained something I never had before, the absolute certainty that I needed no one's approval or love to be complete. I finished my champagne and went inside, closing the balcony door on the city lights and the past they represented. Tonight, I would sleep soundly in the bed I had made, literally and figuratively. Tonight I was home. John thought time would fix things. He thought he'd bounce back. 6 months had passed since the day his world collapsed. 6 months of desperate attempts to rebuild what he had lost. I watched his efforts from afar, Not with obsession, but with the clinical interest of someone observing the final moves in a chess game long after checkmate has been declared. But I made sure he never would. Recovery should have been possible. America loves a comeback story, after all. With his education, his connections, his experience, John should have been able to start over. It might not have been the penthouse lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to, but a reasonable life was within reach. If I had left him alone. But that text message, those 17 words that dismissed 8 years of marriage, had earned him more than just the loss of his money and his girlfriend. I had already ruined his business reputation. No company would touch him. Within weeks of his downfall, carefully selected evidence of financial impropriety had found its way to his former colleagues, clients, and industry publications. Nothing explicitly illegal. I wasn't interested in sending him to prison, but enough to raise serious questions about his judgment and ethics. An anonymous email to the licensing board had triggered an audit of his professional certifications, resulting in a 6-month suspension for administrative discrepancies. By the time the suspension was lifted, his name had become toxic in the industry. His old friends? They knew everything. The strategic leaking of private messages where he had mocked them behind their backs, criticized their wives, belittled their achievements, had severed those connections permanently. The same people who might have offered him a couch to sleep on or a referral for a job now declined his calls and crossed the street to avoid him. No one wanted to associate with the man who lost everything to his ex-wife and his own mistress. The story had spread through their social circles like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each retelling. In some versions, Lisa had been working with me from the beginning. In others, John had been involved in elaborate financial crimes. The truth hardly mattered anymore. The narrative had taken on a life of its own. My favorite detail was one I hadn't even planned. Someone had created a hashtag #Don'tJohnMe, that briefly trended as shorthand for spectacularly self-destructive hubris. I saw it used in Twitter discussions about everything from corporate failures to scandals. John had become not just a failure, but a cautionary tale. I tracked his downward spiral through public records and the occasional updates from mutual acquaintances who didn't know about my involvement. After being evicted from his third rental for non-payment, he had moved to a residential motel on the outskirts of the city. He worked as a rideshare driver, using a car rented by the week at predatory rates. His dating profile, using a slightly altered name but unmistakably him, described him as temporarily between opportunities and misunderstood by those who once knew me. The desperation leaked through every carefully worded line. I felt no joy in this knowledge, no triumph, only a strange, hollow satisfaction that justice had been served in full measure. One night, months later, I saw him. It wasn't planned. I was in New York for a conference. My financial consulting business had expanded dramatically over the past year, partly due to the reputation I'd gained for my shrewd handling of my own divorce. I had just finished dinner with clients and was returning to my hotel when I spotted a familiar figure. He was sitting outside a rundown motel, staring blankly at the street. The neon sign above blinked vacancy in harsh red letters, illuminating his face in rhythmic pulses. In that unforgiving light, I could see how much he had changed. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt. The designer watch was gone from his wrist, replaced by an empty band of paler skin. He looked nothing like the man who once smirked as he left me behind. For a moment, I considered driving past. What more was there to say? What could possibly be gained from another confrontation? But something made me slow the car. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the need for one final moment of closure. Perhaps it was simply the human instinct to witness the end of a story, even a painful one. I instructed my driver to pull over, just for a moment. John didn't notice the luxury car stopping across the street. He was too absorbed in whatever thoughts haunted him now, his gaze fixed on some distant point only he could see. I watched from my car for a few seconds before rolling down the window. He looked smaller somehow, diminished not just by his circumstances, but by the weight of consequences too heavy for his shoulders to bear. "Enjoying NYC?" I called out. He turned, eyes wide with recognition. First confusion, then shock, then a complex emotion I couldn't quite name. Fear? Shame? Anger? Perhaps all three, swirling together in the face of the architect of his downfall. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't wait for an answer. I stepped on the gas and left him there, because I was done. The encounter lasted less than 10 seconds, but it provided the period at the end of a sentence that had been years in the writing. As my car pulled away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Not the vindictive satisfaction I had once craved, but something quieter and more profound. The closing of a book, the end of a chapter. And I had won. Not just the penthouse or the money or the divorce. I had won back myself. The woman who had been silenced by his dismissal, the woman who had been erased by his betrayal, she was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth in a way she never had before. Back in my hotel room, I stood at the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, John was returning to his motel room, perhaps replaying our brief encounter, perhaps wondering if he had imagined it. I turned away from the window and opened my laptop. Tomorrow, I had a presentation to deliver, clients to impress, a business to grow. My calendar was full of meetings, social events, and travel plans. My life was rich with possibilities that had nothing to do with the man I had once thought was essential to my happiness. John had sent me 17 words that he thought would destroy me. Instead, they had set me free. And that was the final blow, not what I had done to him, but what I had done for myself. I had taken his attempt to break me and used it to forge something unbreakable. Something that was mine alone. I closed my laptop and smiled. The story was over, and I was ready for whatever came next.